Hello, and welcome to episode number 142 of A Mic on the Podium, with me, Michael Seal. Today, I conduct a conversation with a conductor who's held title positions in Germany and his native Switzerland, but is probably better known now as being one of the foremost teachers of conducting in the world today. His pupils include Eduardo Strausser and Kerem Hassan, both of which I've interviewed for this podcast, and Mirga Gražinita Tiller, until recently the music director of the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. It's a great pleasure to welcome Johannes Schlaefli. Johannes, it is wonderful to finally meet you virtually online today and to speak with you. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm busy and I'm fine.
That's all we can ask for, isn't it, really? As my listeners know, I always go right back to the beginning and find out if you came from a musical family or whether your musicality just came out of the blue, and what your earliest experiences with learning instruments were.
Yes, so my father was not a musician, neither my mother, but my father, he was how do you say in English, father, a priest.
Okay.
But he played really quite well the piano, and what was very inspiring for me, sometimes he just sat at the piano and improvised in a kind of classic romantic style. And we were 4 children, and it was kind of normal in our family that we learned an instrument. So I went the kind of normal way, you know, the recorder in the school, and then piano lessons. And then when I was about 8, I really got interested in classical music. We had a concert with a oboe player in our church, and I was so fascinated by this personality, basically, that from then on I wanted to play the oboe. And that's what I did. Later I found out it's not the perfect instrument for me. Before that, I always said I wanted to play the cello, and that would have been a better choice, I think, because you know, where physically I was never really good. So, but that's how it started, and then I love to play and sing in choirs, play in the school orchestra. I did my normal, you know, school, high school, or what is in English, well, up to the age of 20, what you do. And then instead of going to college, I went to study music.
At the Basel Music Academy, is that correct?
Yes. So that was kind of a normal way of coming closer to music as a child from a kind of well-established middle-class family. In German, we say Bildungsbürgertum.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether I've asked this question for quite a while now, and I'm going to jump straight into the fact that we're conductors. I look on enviously at people who studied wind and brass instruments, and because, you know, as a string player, which I was a professional for 22 years, there isn't much about string playing I don't know, but there's loads about the oboe and the bassoon and the clarinet. I wonder whether I can flip that coin to you and ask you, you know, do you wish you'd taken up a string instrument? Did you, in fact, once you started taking up conducting, have some preliminary lessons to try and find out what string playing was all about? I mean, if you could go back, do you think the cello would have been a better option now, as a conductor?
Not necessarily. I mean, I had a few cello lessons actually, and a little bit, but it was really very, very, very basic. But from my point of view as a conductor now is with the strings, it's physically visible completely what you do. You know, how many hairs you use, how much on the fingerboard, how much not, with the physicality of the bow and bow speed and all this. It's all there's no secret. You can see everything.
Yes.
So you can, I feel, I do bowings and stuff. I feel I could develop a real empathy for how it would be if I would play it. I think for wind playing, it's a little bit more difficult to really activate the inner empathy for how does that feel when you take the breath, and how different it is to take a breath for a longer phrase and so on, and how it is to not destroy a phrase, but take short breath in between, all that. And I'm somehow glad I have this in my bones. And for the strings, I try to learn as much as I can by observing, and I'm fine with it.
What you say is very true, actually. All of the visual clues are there for us to watch and see a string player. Whereas, with things like articulation, tonguing, all of that is hidden. It's all within the mouth, and even behind a mouthpiece of a brass instrument, it's still all hidden away. That makes it more difficult.
Yeah, and the whole physicality of how you feel in your body, what kind of posture as a wind player you like that your conductor has, that makes you feel ready to go, and all this. I think, but on the other hand, I think that I had students, string players, who became very good conductors, and I think it also can work quite well the other way around. It's just a question of the openness and the capacity of really have empathy with the physical aspects also of playing other instruments you don't really play, but being able to visualize how it must feel. And as long as you do that, I think I basically believe as a conductor, this is a very kind of important part, this empathy in a really wide sense. Of course, empathy also for the role within the orchestral sound of whatever, but also for how you feel physically doing that.
Yes, that's very, very, very true. Well, we're going to come on to your teaching soon enough. But at this point, let's go back to the Basel Music Academy. You're studying the oboe, you're studying music. How did the C word, conducting, first come into your life? What made you suddenly think, do you know what, I think that's something I want to attempt?
Yeah, actually, the conducting came more like by accident, so to speak. I actually wanted to go on studying the oboe. I did studies. I finished. Was really good, and then I went I was like a very green person. Wanted to go to the mountains, and I was helping building up a music school in the mountains, and I went to the villages, and I taught the children the recorder. I led the choir of the church. We had a little orchestra with 3 violins, one recorder, one flute, one clarinet, the piano and the cello, and I arranged pieces for them and all that. So I was very much into that for a certain period of time. And then I actually decided, no, I want to go back to the city, to the high-class musical making, and I wanted to study on the oboe. But somehow I got a prize, but it was more like a joke. I did a kind of competition for conductors, and they gave me the prize. And there Mario Venzago, who was looking for an assistant, he asked me if I would do that, and he recommended me, and somehow it started. So, and then I had, coming back to the city, I had suddenly work as a conductor, but not work as an oboe player. And it went on like this, and then I realized that I'm not a good conductor because I had no training.
Yes.
Then I went to different master classes and observed many people and tried to learn on my own. And that's somehow how it started, yeah.
Well, Mario Venzago is a name I know. In fact, I was still playing in the orchestra in the CBSO in Birmingham. The last time I saw Mario, he asked whether somebody would conduct whilst he went out and listened in the rehearsal. And the concertmaster said, yeah, there's a guy in the seconds, he'll do it. And then we had a good chat afterwards, and a lovely, lovely man. Would you consider him, I mean, if you do your digging online and look up facts about Johannes Schlaefli, there are 5 names that are mentioned as being mentors or people you've studied or gone on courses with or masterclasses. There's Mario Venzago, Eric Schmidt, Leonard Bernstein, David Zimmerman, and Bernard Haitink. Do you think Mario was the biggest influence, and how did you cope with, often what we do is we get 5 different approaches to conducting from 5 different conductors, and how do you collate all of that and form it in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, Mario, that was really completely at the beginning.
Yeah.
I visited him in his house, and then he was showing me how he studies the scores, and we were working together. And to start, I took a completely his approach, how he works into the score and how he works with the orchestra. That's what's my role model, and that's how I started. And then I was one summer in Tanglewood, where I had the chance to also work with Bernstein and Osawa. And Bernstein was really I mean, I was thinking about with this question, favorite yesteryear conductor. Bernstein is really one, but actually as a human being with passion and love for music, communicating to the people. But when I listen to his recordings now, mostly I don't like them so much.
Funnily enough, I'm going to whisper it. Neither do I either. There are certain things, certain composers say he should never have gone near. I mean, Mahler, I think they're wonderful, but yeah, don't let him near Shostakovich, for God's sake, or Sibelius, frankly.
Yeah, but many things, it's just too slow, just too much on the spot, just not enough. But that's of course very much a matter of point of view, of taste. But that was in that way. That was it was just 2 weeks we were with him there, but that was so impressive. I still have so present many situations from that.
I'm assuming after or during this time when you're going to masterclasses is when you become the co-founder of the Kammerorchester Basel in 1984, and you stayed with them 15 years. Who did you co-found it with? And why? I mean, obviously, the obvious reason why we form an orchestra is because we want to conduct one, and the easiest way of getting yourself lots of work is to start your own orchestra. But what form what made you think, you know what, it's a good idea, Basel needs a chamber orchestra?
No, it was not that way. It was with friends of the same age from Music Academy, who they already had a young players orchestra, and then they asked me to do it together. And at that time in Basel, there was still Paul Sacher, who had let's say a concert series under the name of Basler Kammerorchester. But a real chamber orchestra was no more existing. What he did was with people from the symphony orchestra and the radio orchestra, just for his concerts. And of course, what he did for the music, the new music with all these commissions is fantastic. But a fresh, and it was the time, when we had the first recordings by Arno Goul and his first books and this completely new approach to classical music. And we were all like, yeah, that's the thing. And then, of course, chamber orchestra, small and fresh. So we decided to found this orchestra. And first, we were not allowed to call it chamber orchestra, Basel Chamber Orchestra. So we had this name Serenata. And then step by step, this orchestra transferred its name. And now just this weekend, we had a masterclass with them, and it's now fantastic orchestra. It now has the name Basel Chamber Orchestra and is really the chamber orchestra of Basel.
Which is great that it's still going and it's still thriving. I mean, you're also currently, until 2024, I believe, the chief conductor of the Collegium Musicum Basel Symphony, which is I'm assuming, a bigger orchestra in your home city. Yeah.
This is a symphony orchestra, but this is a kind of, it's a kind of a project orchestra with professional musicians, many of them doing a lot of teaching music. And that has also a very interesting and good side. So They also had things like, they called it pre-concerts, where young ensembles with kids were playing before the concert, and then their parents and them, they came also to the real concert. And we went to schools with projects, and I think good things, interesting things, but it's not a permanent professional orchestra. So it's also limited in the possibilities what you can do.
You just mentioned teaching, and we're going to go there now because it's the thing that you're probably, I suppose, most famous for outside of Switzerland, conducting in Basel and Bern and places, and Mannheim, where you've also had a relationship with an orchestra for 6 years in Mannheim in Germany. But teaching is where you're most well known.
Yeah.
I have a theory here, in the fact that I think it sounds like you said you never had any formal training. You got a lot from Mario Vinzaga early on, but you were collating ideas all of the time from people you studied masterclasses with, courses with, and then the best way of learning at all, which is going out there and doing it and screwing up, and then learning what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad, and watching other people doing it.
Yeah.
Why did you start teaching? And do you think that having almost taught yourself, it's helped you with at the start of when you started teaching?
Yes, I think very much so. I mean, the teaching also came a little bit by accident in the way that it was in the 90s when I decided I need more feedback, and I did summer courses, summer workshops. And there they asked me for the next summer, do you want to be our assistant? And then somehow I got into teaching in these summer courses. And then I also studied at the university. And then when they created this conducting class in Zurich, they asked me to be the professor. So it also came kind of by itself. And I think my thing about teaching is that, but I have to say I had to learn this by many years and by many mistakes, that I'm convinced that the best way of teaching conducting is to have no school of conduct. I have no certain style. And whenever people said that, oh, your students look very different from each other, I always took this as a big compliment. That's what I want to keep. That it's really about helping them as a coach. I would rather say coach than teacher, helping them to go that way, what I went alone with myself, to go that way, but maybe a little bit quicker, because I can be a good coach and make them aware of things that help them to advance quicker to the best version of themselves.
Well, I think it's very true. I mean, I know, speaking to Mark Heron, who has that role at the Royal Northern College of Music, he is another one who, he's not trying to force somebody's body into doing things that they don't want to do. He's not trying to change their personality, the way they speak or the way they gesture. It's about, making the person that stands in front of them for the first time a better conductor by enabling, by helping, by cajoling, by maybe just gently pushing them in a certain direction, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I know that I've interviewed two. I went back through my episode list and interviewed two of your former students, Kerim Hassan and Eduardo Strausser. And of course, I did also work closely as associate conductor in Birmingham with another one of your students, Mirga Grajanita Tilar. And I think when it comes to male and female conductors, that's obviously a hot topic at the moment, but to let them be themselves is the most important thing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
What tips can you give to a young conductor who is starting out about the best way of finding out how to be themselves, other than the obvious, which is not copying Carlos Kleiber videos?
Yeah. Well, I think this is a very big question. There are quite a few ingredients, and one ingredient certainly is to study the scores of the pieces they are dealing with in a way and with patience and with depth that I tend to call it you have to study the piece as long until you feel it speaking from the inside out. And you have to study it so well that then when you go to listen to different recordings, because I think that's one thing you should do, because it's inspiring, but that then it's for you very clear that, oh, this I don't like, this I like, this no, that cannot be, and so on. So establishing a kind of strong, clear inner voice about what does this piece say and how should it sound. And then be honest with that. But then, of course, the next step is to learn conducting is not just a proactive profession. It's very much also a reactive profession. So the ability to find a good balance between giving, inspiring, and really be humble and listen to what you get as an offer from orchestras, and find a way of conversation, sometimes absolutely without words, just within playing, where you find your common ground and where you find your common interpretation. And that's of course a tricky field, because on one hand it could mean that someone, a young conductor, thinks she has her view, but the orchestra sounds great, so let's do it like that. That's with a good orchestra could be very easy. But on the other hand, that's not what an orchestra needs on long term. Orchestra needs a real partnership, needs a real strong founding of the conductor, even if there are how do you say in English, if there are conflicts and issues or fields of conflict, but this has to be. And then on the other hand, young conductors who just are stubborn with I think at this moment when someone was with a very clever idea and just didn't want to give up and tried it, and it was kind of obvious that it will not sound good here and now, and with this orchestra, this will not sound good. And the experience you, and then I think sometimes he was always very gentle with the young conductors. He would come up as he did slowly and put a hand on the shoulder and say, don't you think that's now maybe an idea fix? Try it without the idea fix. Just be in the moment, and I mean that's to find the right balance between this. This is the big thing, I think, for the young conductors to develop into something where they have this balance, where they have their really real clear personality on one hand, and on the other hand are really cooperative workers, primus inter pares, with an orchestra, and give the orchestra the space to develop. And that's the thing I also find very interesting as a coach.
Absolutely.
Observe that and to give advice within that balance.
The minute you said the word react earlier on, I grinned widely, and even the listener might have heard me go gently, because to me that is so much part of what a good conductor does. And I'm talking to somebody who has had a foot in both camps. I was an orchestral musician and now I am a conductor. To have the ability to react, it's not only, as you've just been talking about then, to react to when an idea you have isn't going to work with that orchestra that week this time, to react to that and think, okay, there are other battles I might want to try. Let's, I can leave that one alone. But it's also, and I'm pretty convinced that you will agree with me on this, it's also the ability to react to when things are going wrong, or when you need to, stop putting, your positive gestures forward to the orchestra, and then suddenly you're needed to be a helper. You need to react quickly to sort something out in the orchestra. And you don't just stick to and my inverted commas are coming out, your dance routine that you've learnt about, I think I should conduct this by like this. You have to suddenly jettison that and react to the problem with the orchestra, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was with a colleague, and we had for a masterclass, we had to sort out 240 videotapes, and he asked me, "What are you looking for when you have to go through videotapes?" And then I came up with that metaphor. I still like that. I would like to have the feeling that I see like a tripod. Leg number one of the tripod is be the music. That's the proactive part, that have a clear idea and radiate that idea so strongly that the orchestra somehow cannot get apart from that. But on the other hand, as Panula often said, always help, never disturb. Which is very much the opposite of it, which seems to be like, oh, okay, I just stand there and give the pulse, and then they play, and mostly I don't disturb because they do well, and here I help and there I help. But this kind of being aware who needs my help, when, why, in what way, like this, I come back to the idea that I think there must be also a physical empathy for the players.
Yes.
So that's in the second, all that is in the second leg. Don't disturb, but help. And then the third leg to make the balance of the tripod would be the communication field that young conductors try to conduct, I believe, also as much as possible by memory, really knowing the score, to be really in contact with the people. One of my colleagues always said, you don't conduct Tchaikovsky, you conduct the people playing Tchaikovsky. And having this aspect really awake all the time by having a really open field of communication where you realize much quicker and much stronger, now you need to really be the leader, and now you really need to get out of the way, and now you really need to help that or this. And I think that there is really the really interesting part of teaching conducting, not all the preparations. Also very interesting, of course, the discussion about what does that piece mean, why should it be like this and not like that, and so on and so forth. But and then having a clear idea and a clear version, but then the story starts when the first sound comes back. And then it's about this moment where your idea meets in your hands, so to speak, the response from the orchestra and the orchestra's idea. And how do they match? How do they interact? What is the chemistry? And what needs to be done now? And there is the reaction moment, which I think is the real interesting and fascinating moment in conducting, and where I'm very much interested in.
And for the non-musical, and what I mean by this, dear listener, is for those of you who are regular listeners to this podcast because you want to know what conducting is about, but you don't play an orchestra instrument, or you don't even play an instrument, you don't even sing, but you're fascinated. Johannes has just, in a nutshell, with that wonderful metaphor, talked about what we have to do as a conductor, the tripod metaphor. And when it means that when you come to teach conducting, which we both do, to Johannes to a much greater extent than I, what it means is that no day can be the same, because you have it, conductor A standing in front of orchestra A, conducting, let's say, Brahms's First Symphony. The orchestra are going to react differently to that student as they're going to react to conductor B and conductor C. And the problems that each conductor either causes or doesn't fix, or, by the tempos they choose or their gesture, it's infinite, the amount of possibilities that as a teacher you're going to stand in front of. And so you're always trying to find ways of helping them to help the orchestra, but also sometimes to, as you said, gently suggest that maybe they're interfering too much when they should be My analogy I always use is about the fact that we're sitting on the back of a horse, the orchestra being the horse, and there are certain times you know when to help the horse jump over the fence or go round a tree. But there are also times when the horse is likely to see a rabbit, which is the random event, and you have to hold the reins and stop them running after the rabbit. That's the random event.
That's very nice that you mentioned this metaphor, because I use it also a lot.
Oh, wow. Oh, right.
I think, but I heard it from Haitink, I have to say.
Yeah.
It didn't come to my mind, but my partner, she is a writer.
Yeah.
And I also sometimes observe, she has a very interesting teacher, observe the teaching, the lessons this teacher gives to the horse riders. There are so many similarities, because it's exactly what you say, that the horse does it all. The orchestra, and the rider has to find a way to be one with the horse, but the horse does it. We don't do it.
And horses, unlike motorbikes and cars, horses have their own brains and their own personalities. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I like this metaphor a lot. It's very nice that you brought this up.
Good, I'm glad. What you won't know is that there is an 11th question, which is possibly something you do when you teach in your class, and it's about score study and also score marking. So when you encourage it, well, let's say when you're learning a score yourself, next time you're doing a guest conducting engagement, how do you go about learning a score? Do you start with the overall picture and then zoom in and zero in on details? Are you a sort of person who goes from the first page to the last? One conductor earlier on in these episodes suggested it's a good idea to learn the first page and the last page and then work your way in like this, which I've never tried because I think it's crazy. And the other thing for the geeks, and there are a lot of geeks who listen to this podcast, are you a marker upper? Do you use red, blue, and black, hieroglyphics, marker pens, or are you just somebody who keeps your score clean? How do you go about learning a score? And because you are an eminent teacher, do you teach that to your students, or do you just let them find their own way?
Okay, that are many questions in one.
There are. It's a sort of 11 to 15, but yeah.
So for me personally, yes, I use blue, red, and green and pencil. And yes, I write things down. One thing I care a lot for is the how do you say in English? The bar group analysis.
Yes, the phrasing and the
I really mark that, with either a line or just how do you say in English? Just a not a full line, just a
dotted line. Yeah,
dotted line, and then to understand the piece fully in its construction, from the big picture into the really small picture, and understand the Lego bricks that the composer uses and how he uses them in a different way, what he does with them in the development section, blah, blah, blah. All this I find really very important to deal a lot with that and try to understand that deeply. When you ask how to go into it, so first I want to have an overview. And nowadays we have all these possibilities. So I take a score and a recording from a conductor. I think that might be decent, and I listen to it with the score, because I'm not a good piano player. So I have an impression. And then I go with the piano and with my brain that's hopefully working decently. I go through it. But from there on, I mean, there I think I get the big picture, and also you can quickly read about the piece, and then you get an idea about the exposition and stuff like that. And then I go through it carefully one time to understand all the bar groups and all the harmonies. to scan the piece like in both dimensions, understand what's going on. And then I start to try to imagine it in physicality, in orchestra. So who will need me where, in what way? Then a very important question. And then if we go back now to the colors, I personally try to use not much and to reduce. For example, I use red for instruments and cues. So I try to reduce it to the really important things. And sometimes that can be a second clarinet coming in a canon in the middle of a bar group where I visualize as a musician. It can be hard to find this entrance, but it's not something that you would hear immediately from the outside. So yes. It can. So it's really based on the question: who might need me where, and I want to make my brain aware, so I mark this red. Example. Or blue is more like the organizing stuff of dynamics and of meter changes and stuff like that. But also, in a way, a phrase that is very naturally growing and diminishing. I don't have to write anything. It's very natural. But when I realize, and now then the second time, this phrase, the crescendo starts later, and how do you say that, the gravitation point is moved to later, and then the diminuendo is very quick, for example. And that's then a thing I visualize. The orchestra has to be reminded. Now we don't start the crescendo. So then I write something. This crescendo starts here. This diminuendo is very, very huge. So I have to really hush them or radiate to them. We need to drop now really quickly. So in that way, that would be my recommendation. But now the third part of the question, what do I ask my students to do? I leave them to do their own thing, but we discuss it, and we discuss the advantages and disadvantages. And I'm always very impressed when I see students who write almost nothing, and I realize, but they really know. I think that's fantastic. I could do it, but my brain is just not so good. I cannot do it, so I need something. And I see others, they kind of need to have touched physically with some color each element of the score, and then it's full of colors. And I think it would be terrible for me. But when I realize with some students, and we talk about, and she or he tries, and finally, the best conducting results always after he or she has done this through the whole score. And then, okay, if you find out this is the thing you need, obviously, then do it. Just make sure later in your life you have enough time for this. Might be some very short nights then, but well. So to come back to your question, as a teacher, I try to make the students very much aware of where do they stand with this ability to really memorize, on one hand, the piece itself in its structure and what it needs in my point of view, and on the other hand, that's now the two legs of the tripod. On the other hand, who in the orchestra will probably need me in what way, when, and how much you can kind of memorize that and have that in your mind and your brain without doing something, or with doing certain things, or with doing a lot. That's then finally a personal question, I think. But what I would advise to be careful is what I see many times with really beginners, that they kind of mark everything they see in the score.
Yeah, you don't need that. You need to highlight, as you've just said, and that's something I do in a different color, it must be said. But those entries where it could be quite a tricky one to catch, or if somebody hasn't played for a long time, it's worthwhile just noticing. Have they picked their instrument up? Yes, they have. You know, timpanist has sat there for a good 5 minutes and he hasn't played anything, and he's still sitting with his chair down below the timpani. He hasn't risen up yet. So you think, well, you're about to come in. And as you said, when a phrase is different the second time round, what that'll do is, A, it helps you realize it. But secondly, when, as often happens, an orchestral player puts their hand up and says, "Maestro, it's different this time from the first time," you can immediately say, "Yes, I know. And the reason is this." Especially things like articulations in Dvorak 8th Symphony. The articulations are different the second time round. Sometimes it can be because Dvorak was lazy, but other times it can be because he wanted a different phrasing. And by noticing it, you're already answering the questions when they come at you, which they will do, because musicians care and they want to know whether it's what's in front of them is correct or not. It's doing all of that homework will help you when it comes to the rehearsals, and to be two of the legs of the tripod, and to know when to hold the reins and when to just enjoy the view on the back of the horse, really. I mean, it's very important. As you can imagine, over 140 episodes or so now, I've heard every single way possible of learning and marking up a score, so nothing ever surprises me anymore. But I really like what you do, is to basically let them find their own way. I don't think I could ever tell people you must use blue for dynamics, you must use red for your hands and arms and tempi, which is what I use. You just let them do their own thing. As long as the piece has gone in there, in their head, doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah, exactly, man. And they should find an extent of using markings or not that helps them to free their spirit in the moment when it happens.
Yes.
That is what counts. And when that means that the person has to write down a lot and then he or she can be free, fine.
Are you a young conductor, thirsty for knowledge and wanting to discover more about the conducting world? Then my Patreon page is there for you. I'm constantly posting new content there based on my experiences as a conductor and as an ex-orchestral player. And I offer you the chance to ask me any question, any time of the day. For instance, you might like to ask me how to mark up and learn a score, as we've just been discussing. When you subscribe, you will gain access to interviews, video posts, tour diaries, articles, and much, much more. If you pay for the whole year, then you'll gain a 10% discount, and if you're a student, contact me directly and there will be a further discount. All of this can be found at patreon.com/a mic on the podium, and from just £5 a month, you can gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. That's patreon.com. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Johannes Schlaefli. Johannes, it's the 10 questions that the previous 130-odd conductors have all answered, and so must you. And I start with, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
I love a lot nature sound, like birds, hardly audible birds whispering somewhere in the fresh air or at the seashore. The nature sounds I love a lot, but mainly soft nature sounds.
Yeah.
But sometimes also a thunderstorm. It can also be really nice. What I really hate is the construction work out on the street, because when they have these really loud machines going on and off and on and off in a completely unpredictable not rhythm, that drives me crazy, because I have to listen there. I cannot listen to anything else. But when will it go on again? When will it disappear again? So this I hate.
Well, you're not alone in that. And nature is probably the most given answer of the sound or noise that people love. But you do also happen to live in a place which is rather beautiful, and within not so long you can be pretty much in a beautiful valley or halfway up a gorgeous Alp. I'm assuming it's something you're very grateful for living where you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even where I live now, it's I can turn this. I don't know if you can see.
I can see trees. That's beautiful.
And
Yeah.
the sky is a little bit cut, but it's a calm neighborhood with many trees. So, for example, here also in the morning when I open the door to the balcony and it's fresh air, and it can be even here. So this kind of yeah, there it is. That's the world, the original.
I'm always very jealous. Yeah, I saw your balcony. A dear friend of mine who is one of my subscribers on Patreon, who's become a dear friend, Christian. Hi, Christian, who lives in Winterthur. Whenever he talks to me on Zoom and he's sitting outside, I'm always terribly jealous of the fact that you're in Switzerland and you've got a balcony. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
I think have a nice breakfast, then go hiking in the mountains. A nice hike, not too hard, but a little bit tiring. Then maybe go to the sauna and then have a really nice dinner with some heavy red wine.
Good. I like it when people mention food in question 3 because it means I'm probably going to get a good answer for question 10. So, which is always good. I look forward to those. You mentioned earlier on Leonard Bernstein being a possible favorite conductor of yesteryear. Is he one of your favorite conductors or of yesteryear? He is. Yeah.
Yeah, but from the old ones, and then of course Haitink is for me was. We were very lucky to have him every year with the Zurich conducting class one time, and these meetings for me were so inspiring, and I saw him conduct quite a few times in real, and yeah, for me he is one of the really great. You know, this thing what I said about having a clear mind, but then meeting the orchestra in his hands, hardly moving when he was old, but it was kind of all meeting there and all the information passing back and forth. I really loved it. So I think definitely.
He is on a list of not many conductors I wished I'd played for. Him, Carlos Kleiber, probably Abada, but him more than any other. And wouldn't you say
of course, Kleiber, of course, as well. I mean, how can you mention Kleiber?
Well, everybody else pretty much has mentioned him, so it's not a surprise. The question I was going to ask you was, or the point I was going to make was, your original 2 choices of Bernstein and Haitink. You've met them both, and they seem to be almost polar opposites as characters, as people. One was very, walked in the room and the world stopped, and he made sure everybody knew he was there. Very, outgoing personality. Whereas Haitink, I've watched documentaries about him with him in it, and he just seems a very humble, quiet man. But music emanated from both of them in 2 spectacularly different ways, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Haitink just seemed to have this inner authority. He wasn't sort of, ripping his clothes off to get what he wanted. Hardly at all.
No, not at all. Yeah, and I had a few moments where I observed also or talked to people playing for him, and also experienced when we had a conducting workshop with my orchestra, and at the end he conducted one movement of Bruckner, and what it did to my orchestra, the people I knew very well, that was really a magic that he somehow was doing nothing, absorbed all love and intention for really beautiful music making. No idea how this worked, but it was for me, it was very impressive and inspiring. And Bernstein, as I said, not when I listen to the recordings now, many things I think that should not be done like that. But what I remember from him as a personality, and with this also when you see the documentaries, when he talks about music, it's fantastic how he comes to the point and how rich this is. Yeah, and you're right. It's polar personalities, and maybe that also says something about myself.
I wonder whether your choices for question 5 would be also polar opposites. Who would be your favorite current conductor or conductors?
I thought about this. Certainly Paavo Järvi, whom I got to know now in Zurich a bit. Um, so fascinating about what he can do technically, and his fresh approach for Beethoven and many things about him I really admire and love. And on the other hand, Ivan Fischer.
Another person who, you know, through his orchestra, his own orchestra, much like you did with the Kammer Orchestra in Basel, you know, I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed watching his masterclasses with the Concertgebouw.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen them,
Yes.
especially the sandwich wrapper metaphor he used about, you know, there's a lovely moment, dear listener, where he asks a young conductor to tell the Concertgebouw Orchestra what they want. The young conductor does this, and he stops the young conductor and says, "Look, you've told me everything about the sandwich except the sandwich. I've heard what color the wrapping is, whether it's paper, cellophane, what's on the outside, the sell-by date, but I don't know what flavor the sandwich is. Just tell them what flavor the sandwich is." You know, absolutely brilliant metaphor. And so again, somebody who obviously really thinks about conducting, much like Paavo, who I've also seen give masterclasses, and yeah, they seem to be two very good teachers and, you know, mentors.
Yeah, but although I think they are, for my awareness, they are really different in music. But I really respect a lot Ivan Fischer's also, his courage to do anything. You know, the concerts he did in Berlin, you know, with the musicians and the public mixed up, and he's somewhere in the middle, or when he suddenly rearranges the orchestra in a very crazy way, but somehow gets this freshness of the moment. This now is the moment. Now it counts, and somehow, yeah, I feel he gets that. I'm fascinated by him.
Number 6, Johannes, is what is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
I think if you put it in, actually, yes, technically, physically, emotionally, Mahler's Second Symphony was, for me, there kind of all this came together. You have this kind of, you have tricky movements, you have tricky passages to how to put together with the offstage people, and then it's really long, and then emotionally at the end, it's really, really huge. So yeah, I think there I really had many tears, and normally I'm quite controlled. I think for me it was this.
Well, maybe when I come to conduct Mahler 2 one day, I can ring you up and ask you how you conduct the bit with the flute and the piccolo and the offstage horns in the beginning of the last movement.
We did that this summer in Gstaad, again in the academy, and Jaap van Zweden is now there, and then he was doing it in the concert, and the fifth movement we didn't, he did later for the concert. And I tried to remember, how did I do that? And I didn't remember. And his score was really full of signs. He had a complete clear way of leading all this kind of free stuff. He had all in his hands. But I think there should be another possibility. There should be some freedom, but still coordination. But I don't remember how I did.
I know I've conducted it once because I did it in a rehearsal for Andris Nelson's in Dortmund, I believe. And I know I did it, but I can't remember how I did it. You know, maybe I just pointed at the right person at the right time. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's on my schedule again in 1.5 years, and I have to think about it again.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Some book, or I mean the reader with some books on it.
Yeah, a Kindle or something similar. And yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I had an answer recently where somebody said 2 books neither of which I ever read. Basically saying I take them with me in case I do have empty periods, but I often end up just going for a meal or going out for a drink with somebody, and I never read them. Or fall asleep on the plane, and then nothing. I take them with me and I never read them. But you do read.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, it's the most popular answer, I would say, probably now.
Yeah, can be, yeah. But it's my answer. I have no other.
That's fair enough. Number 8, what is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
So this is fantasy. It would be very nice if you would have flexibility in number of rehearsals.
Mm.
If you would start and see what it needs and do what it needs and skip what it doesn't need, and this would be normal. That would be very nice. I find it always a kind of pressure to, you have this certain amount of rehearsals, 3 rehearsals or whatever, and to put it into it, and you're thinking, will it fit, will it not fit? That would be nice.
And what also makes, so again, dear listener, if you're not a musician, we accept an engagement with Orchestra ABC, and they tell you that you've got 2 days of rehearsal, 5 hours each day, and then there's a dress rehearsal of 3 hours, and then the concert. Or you could go to Germany, it could be 4 days of rehearsal, slightly less amount during the day, but you have a set amount of time. What makes it worse, and I've just spent the morning doing this for 2 or 3 different orchestras, which is like, could we have a rehearsal order, please? And so actually, in one case this morning, I've left the last day blank because I've basically said, I don't know what I'm going to rehearse on the last day until I've rehearsed the 2 days beforehand. And then I'll find out whether certain pieces need more or less rehearsal. But yeah, wouldn't it be nice to just have, I'm going to rehearse until we're ready. But of course, that can never happen. So we're always squashed into a box of how much rehearsal time we've got. And they want to know, and rightly so, because the harp is only in one of the 3 pieces. They'd quite like to know whether you're going to rehearse it in the morning or the afternoon.
That's why we said that's fantasy. We understand why we have to do it.
Yeah,
and we understand that it has to be like this, but it's sometimes not nice.
No, it makes things tricky.
Yeah.
Number 9, let's see if you go real or fantasy with this one. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt or have liked to have attempted?
I don't really have, I can say things like that. There was a time when I was very much interested in psychology, and I thought maybe I will study psychology, but then I decided for music. But then what profession would it have been? I don't know. But on the other hand, psychology is very close to what I do now.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, if you want to indulge in a profession that has an awful lot of psychology in it, welcome to the world of conducting. Absolutely true. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Then
true.
that's not really an alternative in that way. So I don't really know. I don't really have an answer for that.
Well, it's been a long time. I often get, things like psychology as an answer. Also, architect is quite a popular answer. And then I point out that actually, if you look at a symphony as a conductor, you already are sort of being an architect. You're looking at this huge overall picture, but you're also going in and looking at the wiring, and where the pipes go for the plumbing. You are looking at individual bowings and phrasings and where to breathe. And you are looking from big to small, which is sort of what an architect does. But yeah, it's been a long time since somebody's been happy with their lot, and that's fine, Johannes. It's absolutely fine. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
If the world would end tonight, and then I would certainly go to a restaurant and have a very nice meal with a steak and with some potatoes and some vegetables and a very heavy red wine, and then a very nice dessert. Kind of very normal, but I have to say that I try to eat really almost no meat, or just once or twice a week maximum, but for not because I don't like it, but because of environment.
And health. Yeah, but if the world were about to end and you knew it was, yeah.
There's no more reason to do this, so I would really go with what I really would like to eat. Yeah.
And an excellent answer it is. It's been a wonderful hour chatting to you, Johannes, especially about what we do as conductors, how you teach, and all aspects of teaching conducting. I found it fascinating. I know that my listeners will as well. So thank you. And I hope one day we can carry on, maybe over very heavy red wine, and carry on chatting in the future. Thank you, Johannes.
Yeah, that would be very nice. Thank you very much for having me. And it was really very nice discussion. And I'm so happy that we have the same metaphors about conductors and orchestras. And yeah, let's hope for having a glass of really heavy, fantastic red wine one day. Thank you so much.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a British conductor who, after studying the bassoon in Germany, ended up being a professional player in Berlin for 10 years. Then, in 2012, she decided to move towards conducting and now has a very successful guest conducting career all across the globe. But until then, bye-bye.